The Galactic Concordat, for all its diplomatic prowess, was a fractured military alliance. Each member species brought its own unique, often spectacular strengths to the table, but also its glaring weaknesses. This was the natural order of things, in a galaxy where evolution and culture sculpted specialized warriors. The Cathar hegemony, with their 6 limbs and natural agility, were masters of void-to-ground shock assaults. Their troop transports were designed for rapid atmospheric entry, deploying legions of genetically optimized skirmishers that could scale any surface. In open space or prolonged siege, however, their ships were lightly armored, and their ground forces struggled against fortified positions. The Solarian Ascendancy, a race of sentient light beings, commanded fleets of unparalleled energy projection. Their capital ships could unleash beams that cauterized planets, and their starfighters wove through battlefields like streaks of pure plasma. But their physical forms were fragile, making ground combat an anathema, and their ships vulnerable to kinetic bombardment. The Groknar Confederation, massive rock-skinned bipeds, were siege specialists. Their dreadnoughts were mobile fortresses, bristling with heavy kinetic cannons and impenetrable shields. On the ground, their armored legions moved like unstoppable glaciers. Their weakness was speed. Their ships were agonizingly slow, and their ground troops easily outmaneuvered. And then there were a dozen other species, each a master of a niche: the stealth and infiltration of the elusive Xylos, the advanced electronic warfare of the Ethel, the orbital bombardment expertise of the Avian. They formed a magnificent if unwieldy mosaic of galactic might. Their military doctrine was one of rigid specialization. You deployed Cathar for rapid invasion, Solarian fleets for orbital superiority, and Groknar for breaking static defenses. Combining them was considered inefficient, even detrimental. Each species' command structure, their training, their very mindset, was geared towards optimizing their specific talent. This system had worked, largely because the Concordat's primary enemies, the chaotic and disorganized hive mind of Xylos Prime, lacked any truly coherent strategy. But that changed with the emergence of the Mal'kon Directorate. The Mal'kon were different. They were pragmatic, adaptable, and their forces were brutally balanced. Their ships, while not as grand as the Solarians, were well-rounded. Their ground troops, while not as fast as the Cathar or as tough as the Groknar, were versatile. They didn't specialize. They simply adapted. And they were winning. The Concordat was losing the war. Their specialized fleets, designed to win perfect, textbook engagements, were being outmaneuvered and systematically dismantled by a foe that simply refused to fight on their terms. Individual victories were achieved, but the overall strategic picture was bleak. Admiral Valtor, a venerable Solarian fleet commander, stood before the combined military council. His light body shimmered with barely contained frustration. Our strategies are failing. The Mal'kon are exploiting our predictable deployments. Their ground forces are holding against the Cathar, while their cruisers are picking apart our flanks. We need to adapt. General Kraxus, a burly Cathar ground commander, slammed a 6-limbed fist on the table. Adapt how, Solarian? We must simply commit more Cathar. A full legion of stormtroopers would break their lines. Commander Grolgath, a towering Grolthak, rumbled in disagreement. No! We must bring our heavy bombardment vessels to bear, shatter their defenses from orbit! The debate was as old as the Concordat itself, each species advocating for the primacy of its own unique strengths, unable to see the forest for the trees. Then, a quiet, almost hesitant voice cut through the cacophony. Perhaps, if I may, be so bold. What we require is not more of any one thing, but a different way of using everything. All eyes turned to the source of the interruption. It was Captain Elias Vance, the human representative. He was relatively new to the combined command, a species whose military contribution was, to be frank, considered minor. Their ships were decent, their ground forces tenacious, but they lacked any truly outstanding specialization. They were generalists. Their fleets were middling, their ground troops adaptable, but without any singular defining trait. They were considered competent, but uninspiring. "And what is your suggestion, human?" Admiral Valtor asked, a flicker of irritation in his light form. "Commander Vance, actually," Elias corrected mildly. "And my suggestion is combined arms and a whole lot of chaos." Elias Vance was, by galactic standards, a profoundly unremarkable figure. He was average height, average build, with a slightly rumpled uniform and a perpetually tired look in his eyes. He possessed no unique physiology, no inherent telepathic abilities, no crystalline skin or multiple limbs. He was simply human. And his species, in the grand tapestry of galactic militaries, was a generalist. Humans were good at many things, but excellent at few. Their starships were balanced, their infantry adaptable, their tactics pragmatic. They could fight in space, on land, in water, and even in the void itself. But they were never the fastest, the strongest, or the most technologically advanced. This made them competent support, but rarely leaders. However, their history was a testament to one undeniable fact. Humans knew how to make disparate elements work together. Their armies had always been a blend of infantry, cavalry, artillery, and air power. Their navies incorporated everything from aircraft carriers to submarines. They were masters of synergy, of turning a collection of mediocre parts into a devastating whole. This concept, combined arms, was as fundamental to human warfare as breathing. To the specialized races of the Concordat, it was an alien concept. After much contentious debate and primarily out of desperation, the Concordat Military Council reluctantly granted Vance command of a desperate, multi-species relief effort to the besieged world of Xylos 4. It was a strategically vital planet, currently being overrun by a Mal'kon invasion force. The mission was considered a forlorn hope, a suicide run to buy time. Vance was given a motley collection of forces: a small squadron of Solarian energy frigates, a contingent of Cathar skirmishers, a company of Grolthak heavy infantry, a few Xylos stealth scouts, and his own human contingent of multi-role fighters and marine platoons. Each commander was deeply skeptical of working with the others. "Human, how do you intend to deploy my Groxkin in a rapid assault?" Commander Grolgath rumbled, his voice laced with disdain. "We are siege breakers, not sprinters." "And our skirmishers, human, how do they assist your slow bipedal Grolthak?" Craxus retorted, his 4 eyes gleaming with challenge. Vance just smiled, a weary, knowing smile. "Gentlemen, you're thinking in terms of your individual strengths. I'm thinking about how you complement each other's weaknesses. We're not going to win this by being the best at one thing. We're going to win it by being the best at being everything." His plan, when he presented it, was met with a stunned silence. It was not elegant. It was not predictable. It was a chaotic symphony of coordinated, simultaneous attacks designed to overwhelm the Mal'kon's balanced forces by hitting them everywhere, all at once, with every different kind of weapon imaginable. The battle for Xylos 4 was an unprecedented mess, a tactical nightmare for the Mal'kon, and a terrifying, exhilarating spectacle for the Concordat forces. Vance didn't send the Grolthak in first. Instead, the Xylos stealth scouts, tiny, barely detectable ships, slipped past the Mal'kon blockade, planting high-yield kinetic mines along their primary warp lanes. The mines detonated, not to destroy, but to temporarily disable and disorient, creating precisely timed gaps in the Mal'kon formation. Through these gaps, the Cathar transports plunged, not for a direct assault, but to deploy their skirmishers onto the backs of the Mal'kon ships. The agile Cathar tore through auxiliary systems, targeting weapon emplacements and sensor arrays, creating vulnerable points. Then, and only then, did the Solarian frigates strike. Their pinpoint energy lances, guided by the data streaming from the Cathar incursions, exploited the weaknesses, tearing through shields and armor with surgical precision. The Mal'kon, used to fighting a single specialized threat at a time, were suddenly grappling with a multi-front assault that shifted and changed focus with blinding speed. In orbit, the space battle was a dance of death and destruction, a ballet of disparate species fighting as one. But the true chaos was on the ground. The Mal'kon ground forces on Xylos 4 were entrenched, their heavy armor and versatile infantry holding the line. Vance didn't send his Grolthak heavy infantry in a frontal assault. Instead, his human marines, masters of infiltration, were inserted deep behind enemy lines. They targeted Mal'kon command posts and communication hubs, cutting off the head of the snake. The Cathar skirmishers, meanwhile, were dropped into the thickest Mal'kon concentrations. Their speed and agility allowed them to bypass the heavy armor and engage the more vulnerable support units. They weren't meant to hold a line, they were meant to cause as much disruption as possible. And then, when the Mal'kon lines were in disarray, confused by the simultaneous attacks from all directions, Vance unleashed the Grolthak. They didn't march in a stately line. They were dropped from orbit in specialized one-way dropships, landing like meteorites on critical Mal'kon strongpoints. Their heavy armor and devastating firepower, used not as a primary assault, but as a surgical strike, shattered the already crumbling Mal'kon defenses. The fighting was brutal, chaotic, and utterly disorienting for the Mal'kon. They were used to fighting the Cathar in open terrain, the Solarians in space, and the Grolthak in sieges. They were not used to fighting all of them, simultaneously, in a meticulously coordinated yet seemingly random ballet of destruction. They fight like a swarm of angry beasts. The Mal'kon commander on Xylos 4 roared, watching his tactical display fill with red icons of friendly fire and inexplicable enemy breakthroughs. Their tactics make no sense, but they made perfect sense to Elias Vance. He was orchestrating a symphony of chaos, each specialized force playing its part in a grand, terrifying opera of combined arms. The relief effort for Xylos 4 was a stunning success. The Mal'kon were routed, their invasion force shattered. The Concordat forces, initially skeptical, were now energized, if still a little bewildered. Elias Vance had proven that their disparate strengths, when woven together, could overcome even the adaptable Mal'kon. The victory, however, was only the beginning. Vance was immediately promoted to general and given command of the newly formed Combined Arms Task Force Theta. His mission: turn the tide of the war. The Mal'kon Directorate, initially dismissive, was now deeply concerned. Their analysts struggled to comprehend the human strategy. Their tactics are illogical. The Mal'kon Grand Strategist, a cold calculating mind known as Xylar, reported to the Mal'kon High Council. They do not adhere to any discernible doctrine. One engagement, they send waves of Cathar raiders. The next, a heavy Grolthak siege force, supported by Solarian orbital fire, strikes at our most fortified positions. There is no pattern. The BIA pattern, another Mal'kon strategist corrected grimly, is no pattern. They are adapting their strategy to our perceived weaknesses in real time. They are combining their disparate forces in ways we cannot predict. Vance's approach was a strategic nightmare for the Mal'kon. He didn't just combine forces, he combined doctrines. He would use Cathar void-to-ground shock assaults, but instead of targeting enemy garrisons, they would bypass them entirely, targeting critical infrastructure like power plants or communication relays, forcing the Mal'kon to divert forces from the main front. He would use Solarian fleets for orbital superiority, but instead of simply destroying enemy ships, they would coordinate with human electronic warfare teams to jam enemy communications, leaving Mal'kon fleets blind and disoriented. He would use Grolthak legions for sieges, but instead of a slow, grinding advance, they would be supported by Xylos stealth teams who would disable shield generators or open hidden breaches in enemy fortifications, turning the siege into a swift, brutal assault. The Mal'kon, who prized balance and adaptability, found themselves constantly reacting to a foe that was even more adaptable, a foe that could change its entire tactical identity with each engagement. Vance's general staff was a microcosm of the Concordat itself, a Solarian fleet admiral, a Cathar ground general, a Grolthak logistics officer, a Xylos intelligence chief, and his own human chief of staff. It was a constantly arguing, perpetually stressed, but ultimately brilliant team. General, the Solarian fleet detects a major Mal'kon staging area on the gas giant of Nebulous Prime, Admiral Valtor reported, his light form pulsing with anticipation. A perfect target for a focused energy bombardment. "No!" Craxus, the Cathar general, interjected. "Their ground defenses are too strong. We must insert Cathar stormtroopers to destabilize the surface installations first." Vance held up a hand. "Both are valid, and both are predictable. What if we make them choose?" His plan for Nebulous Prime was even more audacious than Xylos 4. He ordered a small, almost insignificant human task force equipped with advanced stealth technology to feign a direct assault. On the Mal'kon staging area, simultaneously, he had the Cathar prepare a visibly massive invasion force, but instead of targeting Nebulous Prime, they would make a feint towards a nearby, lightly defended Mal'kon colony world. The Mal'kon, seeing the overwhelming Cathar force heading for their colony, shifted the bulk of their fleet to defend it. As soon as their forces were committed, Vance reversed the Cathar vector, using their innate speed to bring them back towards Nebulous Prime. Meanwhile, the human task force, initially a decoy, was joined by a squadron of Solarian ships that had been hiding in the gas giant's turbulent atmosphere. They launched a devastating, concentrated bombardment on the now lightly defended Mal'kon staging area. The Mal'kon High Command watched in horror as their strategic choices, dictated by their reliance on specialized responses, were systematically exploited. They had been drawn into a double bind, a strategic gambit that had left them vulnerable on two fronts. This wasn't just combined arms, this was combined deception, combined misdirection, combined chaos. "They are chaos engineers," Zilar finally concluded, watching his tactical maps burn red. "They do not fight. They orchestrate. They create the optimal environment for their disparate forces to achieve victory, regardless of the enemy's strengths." As the war progressed, the Concordat's forces, under Vance's command, began to achieve consistent victories. The Mal'kon, for all their adaptability, found themselves constantly reacting to an enemy that refused to be pigeonholed. Their balanced forces, once their strength, became their weakness, as they struggled to respond to the constantly shifting, unpredictable, human-orchestrated assaults. The human contingent within the Concordat military, once considered unremarkable, became the glue that held everything together. Their ships, while not the most powerful, were the most versatile, capable of acting as command and control hubs, logistical support, or even frontline combatants when needed. Their infantry, the Terran Marines, became legendary for their ability to integrate with any allied force, whether supporting the Cathar in lightning raids or holding the line with the Grolthak in protracted sieges. Human engineers designed universal adapters for alien weapon systems, allowing Solarian energy cells to power Grolthak kinetic cannons or Cathar targeting computers to guide human missile launchers. They became the ultimate integrators, the masters of making everything work with everything else. The other species, initially resentful of human command, began to see the brilliance of Vance's doctrine. They began to understand that their unique specializations were not meant to be rigid categories, but tools in a larger, more complex arsenal. General Craxus, the Cathar commander, once a staunch advocate for Cathar primacy, now spoke of the synergistic power of the Concordat. When my skirmishers overwhelm their lines, it is the Grolthak heavy ordnance that breaks their will. When the Solarian fleets open a path, it is the Terran Marines who secure the objective. He was speaking in terms of combined arms. He was speaking the human language of war. The Mal'kon Directorate was on the verge of collapse. Their fleets were shattered, their colonies liberated or in rebellion, their will to fight eroded by an enemy they could not comprehend. Grand strategist Zelar, a pragmatic leader, knew the war was lost. But he had one final gambit, a desperate do-or-die attack on the Concordat's primary logistics hub, a massive orbital station called Nexus Prime. If Nexus Prime fell, the Concordat's supply lines would be severed, their forces would be starved, and even Vance's genius wouldn't be able to save them. Zelar committed every remaining Mal'kon ship, every available soldier, to this single overwhelming assault. It was their last chance. Vance anticipated the move. He knew the Mal'kon would try to sever their lifeline. He also knew that this was the Mal'kon's last, desperate act of specialization. A focused, overwhelming strike at a single, vital target. He decided to meet them with the full, glorious force of his combined arms chaos. The battle for Nexus Prime was the largest engagement of the war. The Mal'kon fleet, a terrifying, unified spearhead, hurled itself at the station. They were met by a defense force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The outer perimeter was defended by a screen of Solarian energy frigates, their lances forming a shimmering wall of light. But hidden within that wall were Grolthak heavy cruisers, their shields absorbing the kinetic impacts that would shatter the Solarians, while their heavy cannons added a brutal kinetic punch to the Solarians' energy barrage. Behind them, Cathar assault carriers, not carrying ground troops, but specialized anti-capital ship drones, launched swarms that tore into the Mal'kon flanks. Xylos stealth corvettes, operating as advanced electronic warfare platforms, jammed Mal'kon targeting systems, turning their disciplined volleys into wild, inaccurate sprays. At the heart of the formation were the human dreadnoughts and carriers, acting as command and control, coordinating the entire chaotic ballet. Their multi-role fighters engaged Mal'kon heavy bombers, their advanced sensor suites providing real-time data to every allied ship, creating a fluid, constantly adapting defense. On the station itself, the Terran Marines, bolstered by Cathar, skirmishers and Grolthak heavy weapon teams fought off waves of Mal'kon boarding parties, turning the sprawling station into a deadly labyrinth. They used every weapon, every tactic, every species' strength in perfect, brutal synergy. Zelar watched from his command ship, his four eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. The humans weren't just combining arms. They had weaponized the very concept of integration. They had taken every disparate element of the Concordat and forged it into a single, terrifying, unspecialized weapon. The Mal'kon were broken, their final specialized push shattered against the wall of humanity's combined chaos. The Mal'kon Directorate surrendered unconditionally. The war was over. General Elias Vance, no longer looking tired but radiating a quiet, focused energy, stood before the Galactic Concordat. He was not a conqueror, but an architect. He had taken a fragmented alliance and turned it into a cohesive, unstoppable force. The Concordat, humbled but victorious, began to restructure its entire military doctrine. The age of rigid specialization was over. The era of combined arms, of human-style integration and adaptability, had begun. Humans, once minor players, were now the primary orchestrators of galactic warfare. The Solarian fleets still projected unmatched energy. The Cathar still launched lightning assaults. The Grolthak still formed an unbreakable line. But now, they did so under the coordinated, adaptable, and often chaotic direction of human generals. the universe learned a profound lesson from the Mal'kon War. It wasn't about being the best at one thing. It was about being the best at making everything work together. It was about turning disparate strengths into a symphony of chaos, a beautiful, brutal testament to the power of unspecialized, adaptable, and endlessly inventive humanity. Elias Vance, the unremarkable human general, had changed the face of galactic warfare forever. He had shown the galaxy that true strength lay not in singular perfection, but in the glorious, messy, and utterly unpredictable power of combined arms chaos.